Hey friends, happy Monday and welcome to the KidMin Word. I'm Ryan Frank and I hope that your 4th of July weekend was a good one. Some time with family, maybe a cookout, a few fireworks, a little rest before the week ahead. You know, there's something fitting about coming off a weekend that celebrates freedom and stepping right into a passage with a man who's finding the courage to stand up and speak boldly. So however your weekend went, welcome back. I'm excited today to dive into Acts chapter 2. Before we do, think for just a minute about the last time you had to say something really hard. Maybe you had to stand up in a room, correct somebody, say something that's true when it's would have been much easier just to be quiet. Now picture Peter. Just weeks before this moment, he had denied knowing Jesus 3 times to a servant girl in a courtyard when Jesus was on trial just a few feet away, right? That's the last thing we know about him as a public figure. Not a leader, but a man who failed under pressure. And now Acts 2:14 says, "But Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and addressed them." He addressed the crowd. He didn't slide into the crowd. He stood up. He raised his voice in front of thousands of people, pilgrims from dozens of different languages, some of them already mocking, saying that these Galileans must be drunk. And Peter doesn't shrink back. He doesn't apologize, right? He simply explains what is going on. He reaches for the prophet Joel, words that the crowd would have known by heart. Let's read verse 17. He says, "In the last days it shall be, that God declares, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams." This wasn't chaos. This wasn't a group of overexcited men who had been drinking too much wine. This was God doing exactly what he said he would do generations earlier through a prophet that nobody expected to matter this much. And Peter lands the whole thing on this incredible promise down in verse 21. "And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Everyone, not the qualified, not the well-spoken, not the ones with a perfect track record, but he says in verse 21 that everyone. And here's what gets me every time I read this. The man standing up to preach the very first sermon of the church age is the same man who couldn't keep it all together in a courtyard just a month and a half earlier, right? God didn't wait for Peter to fix his reputation. He didn't wait for Peter to prove that he would never fail again. He filled him with the Spirit and empowered him to stand up as a restored, not a perfect person. Now, if you're leading kids ministry right now, I want you to sit with that for a second. Maybe you've got a moment you replay, a time that you froze in front of a room of parents, a mistake with a kid that still stings you when you think about it, a Sunday that you didn't handle well. Peter's story is not about erasing moments like that. It's about what God does after those things. God doesn't expect that you never fail. He just needs you to stand up right now where you're at. This week, we're walking through the most consequential sermon in the history of the church, Peter's message on the day of Pentecost. We're going to see boldness, conviction, and a response so big it's almost hard to believe. But it all starts right here with an ordinary, previously failed man raising his voice because the Spirit gave him something to say. So here's my question for you today. And as you walk into this week of ministry, what's the thing that God's asked you to stand up and talk about, right? Whatever it is, or that thing, maybe it's not that he's asked you to talk about. Maybe it's that thing that he's called you to do. Are you ready to step into that? Not because you're perfect, not because you've never failed, but because the same Holy Spirit in Acts 2 resides within you and wants to give you power today. Friends, thanks for tuning in to today's KidMin Word. We'll be back here tomorrow, and I can't wait to see you then.